to keep liquids down for at least 24 hours.
Implementation and Transformation, and Mr. Mike Sylvester, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance. We are also joined this morning by Chief Medical Officer Dr. Sean Charles. Dr. Charles will be providing updates on health-related matters this morning. We will actually invite Dr. Charles to join us at the start of this session to provide updates, and then we will open the floor to the media for any specific questions you may have based on the updates that Dr. Charles will be presenting this morning. So without further ado, I invite Dr. Charles to get us started.
Good morning, Prime Minister, Minister Williams, Permanent Secretary, the media, and the public at large. The Ministry of Health would like to inform the nation about two public health events that are affecting the population at this time. Firstly, Grenada is experiencing an outbreak of acute gastroenteritis. Now, this condition is characterized by nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, and watery diarrhea. Some individuals may have fever and muscle pain, and the symptoms generally last between 1 to 3 days. Now, this increase in cases were noticed about 3 weeks ago, and in the last 3 weeks, a total of 345 cases were reported. Now, this is compared to 70 cases that occurred during the same period in the year 2022. Now, all age groups are affected, but most cases are seen in the 1 to 4 years and the 25 to 44 years age group. There was no significant difference in the number of cases between males and females, and most reports at this time are from St. George, St. Andrew, and Carriacou and Petit Martinique, with the majority of cases being reported from St. George. Now, testing of samples have revealed the cause of this outbreak to be norovirus. However, rotavirus and E. coli, two organisms that also cause acute gastroenteritis, were also identified. Now, this disease is transmitted via what we call the fecal-oral route through the consumption of food and water that is contaminated with viruses and bacteria. It is also transmitted when unclean or contaminated hands or objects touch the mouth. While most cases are mild, gastroenteritis can cause severe dehydration and death in persons who are susceptible, such as the very young, the elderly, and persons with underlying conditions that weaken their immune system. Now, treatment includes consuming fluids such as oral rehydration salts to replace what is lost through vomiting and diarrhea. Drinking water only is not sufficient in most instances because other substances are lost in stools and vomit. Your pharmacist can provide guidance on the type of fluids that can be consumed. One note, we ask that persons avoid using medication to stop diarrhea in children less than 18 because this can precipitate complications. And we advise persons to visit their healthcare provider if any of the following is observed. They are not able to keep liquids down for at least 24 hours. The vomiting and diarrhea lasts about 2 days or more. They notice blood in the vomit. There are signs of dehydration, and these are varied. It could be increased thirst, dry mouth, urine that is very, very little in volume and very dark in color, very yellow in color. severe weakness, dizziness, lightheadedness, and very young children can appear irritable or difficult to arouse or to awaken. Also, if blood is noticed in stool, and if there are severe abdominal pains and a persistent fever, any of these signs present, we advise persons to seek medical attention. The Ministry of Health will continue to monitor and investigate the situation, and we advise the public to take measures to prevent the disease occurrence. Now, secondly, we would also like to report to the public or to inform the public that high numbers of cases of acute respiratory infection were reported in Grenada since the start of the year. So far, we have seen 3,280 cases of acute respiratory infections being reported, and this is compared to the long-term average of 2,354. During the same period in the year 2022, only 1,228 cases were reported. Now, all the age groups were affected once again, but the 1 to 4 years and the 25 to 44 year age groups, there were more reports in these. There was no significant difference between males and females as well. And St. George and St. Andrews were the districts reporting the highest number of cases. Now, testing of samples reveals that a number of viruses are currently in circulation and causing disease. These include the H1N1 virus, that is the swine flu virus, the human metapneumovirus, rhinovirus, adenovirus, parainfluenza virus 1, COVID-19, and respiratory syncytial virus. So all of these are circulating at the same time, and that is what is responsible for all of these cases of the cold and the flu that persons are experiencing. We ask the population to continue to exercise caution to prevent infection with these respiratory viruses. Frequent hand washing and sanitization, avoiding crowded, close contact settings, especially where the ventilation is poor, wearing a mask, getting your seasonal flu shot, and the Ministry of Health does provide seasonal flu shots annually at no cost, and COVID-19 vaccines and boosters all remain effective measures at preventing disease and severe complications. Now, any persons experiencing severe symptoms is advised to seek medical attention, and these severe symptoms can include trouble breathing, persistent pain or pressure in the chest, confusion, inability to wake or to stay awake, and noticing change in the coloration of the skin, such as person become very pale or a purplish coloration of the skin. All right. These are the updates that we wish to provide the public at this time. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Charles, for this comprehensive presentation. We will now open the floor to the media. If you have any specific questions related to Dr. Charles's presentation. To those of you on the Zoom call, you can raise your hand. Okay, Ms. Straker, I see that your hand is raised. The floor is yours. You may pose your first question.
Good morning to everyone. Dr. Sean, can you tell us whether or not with the acute respiratory infection and the various viruses that is going around, can one person be infected with more than one virus at the same time?
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, one person, one individual can be infected by more than one of these viruses at the same time.
Okay. My other question has to do with the first announcement of gastro. You mentioned that it is in the past 3 weeks. Can you just give me the date of those past 3 weeks and reiterate the viruses that is affecting? I remember you wrote, you said neurovirus and E. coli. Can you just share more about the signs and symptoms of these viruses, please?
Okay, so as I mentioned during the presentation, during the last 3 weeks, we recorded 345 cases. That is in the 3-week period that just subsided. This is compared to 70 cases that were seen during the same 3-week period in 2022. And the viruses, or the organisms, the organisms that were identified from testing includes norovirus, rotavirus, and E. coli. Now, all of these produce a similar clinical picture, and which I mentioned, which includes nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, and watery diarrhea. All right. In general, with norovirus, the symptoms last between 1 to 3 days. With the others, maybe up to 6 days or so in some organisms such as rotavirus. But the symptoms that are produced are basically identical.
Okay, thank you, Dr.
If I could just
Charles.
ask a
We'll now move
follow-up.
on to Nisha.
You mentioned that St. George's had the most amount of cases. Can you tell us if there is a particular area or community and what could possibly be happening that these communities are infected? You didn't mention, is it a case that there are no cases like in St. John's or St. Max, or is it a case where people probably get infected and not seeking medical help? So it goes down into the data.
All right, so I mentioned that St. George, St. Andrew, and Carriacou had most reports, and in particular St. George. And there are various reasons for this. As you would recognize, St. George has the largest concentration of healthcare facilities, including private and public. Many cases are reported from St. George, but they are actually individuals who come from other districts to seek care in St. George. And it must be remembered that our main hospital in St. George and large number of cases are picked up at our main hospital, which is opened 24 hours a day. So the reporting district does not necessarily mean that cases are not occurring in the other districts. Now, as it relates to drilling down to the individual communities, I don't have that information at this time to give you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Charles, and thank you, Ms. Straker. We're going to move right along because we do have a number of matters to get through today. So, Nisha Peters, the floor is yours. You may pose your first question to Dr. Charles.
Good morning, Dr. Charles. I'm just want to find out about your immunization vaccine drive that I know the ministry has been undergoing. Has the number changed? Have more people getting their children vaccinated? And how is that going for the ministry thus far?
Well, what I can say is, the Ministry of Health continues to engage in efforts to encourage persons to have the children in particular immunized using the routine childhood vaccines. We have suffered some setbacks due to COVID-19, but even before COVID-19, the issue of increased hesitancy was a challenge. Now, as it relates, it's difficult for me to tell you what the uptick is for this year, but I know that for last year, our numbers or percentages are below the required 95% coverage that ensures that we have population immunity. And this is for several vaccines. This is for our measles, mumps, rubella, or polio. These numbers, or these the coverage levels, are below the expected threshold to ensure that our population has herd immunity. So the Ministry of Health continues its efforts, and we hope that when we do calculate the coverage levels for this year, we will see some sort of improvement.
Okay,
you,
my final question.
Nisha, do you have a
Does the
second
Ministry of Health has anything specifically planned for World Health Day coming up on the 7th?
All right, so there are activities planned. In due course, the public will be informed of whichever activities, and there are also activities for Vaccine Week of the Americas, that the public will be informed about in due course. I know one of the signature activities is a march that is organized for St. Andrew, but the public will be informed of all the other activities in due course.
Thank you, Dr. Charles. We now move on to Nancy McGuire. Nancy, good morning. You may pose your first question.
Good morning to everybody. Dr. Charles, are the cases of the acute respiratory infections, is there any relation there to the air quality? And these increases, are they with people that already have sensitive lungs and conditions, or are they just your average Grenadian that's getting infected? Thank you, sir.
All right, so I do not have any specific research in Grenada linking these infections to the air quality, so I could only speak in general terms as it relates to the fact that yes, there is some correlation between poor air quality and increase in respiratory illnesses. What I can say is that since, you see, during the period of the pandemic, the public was generally very compliant and engaged in a series of activities that prevented their exposure to a number of viruses. All right. Now that also resulted in a waning of immunity to some of these. All right. So as soon as the measures were removed, we saw a return of all of these organisms that you're seeing, and causing higher levels of infection than we saw in previous years. All right, so that is a sort of an explanation. All right. However, the circulation of these viruses in the population, all right, and the transmission of the disease from person to person is what is driving the cases, basically. And if persons adopt measures to prevent themselves from being exposed to these viruses, we anticipate that the numbers will decline.
Thank you, Dr. Charles. Nancy, do you have a second question? Okay, if not, we will move on to GBN for the final question for Dr. Charles.
Yes. Good morning, Dr. Charles. My first question to you is, did we record any bird flu cases? And the second question, can you give me an update on our HIV cases and the age it is affecting on island?
All right. So firstly, the answer is no. We have not detected any bird flu cases in Grenada. That update on the HIV, I did not carry those statistics with me, so I would have to provide that information to you at a later time.
Thank you, Dr. Charles. GBN, do you have another question for Dr. Charles? Okay, if not, Dr. Charles, the final question for this morning, we've had one online that's asking if you believe the seaweed, the sargassum seaweed, is contributing to the any respiratory issues in St. Andrews at the moment.
We have no evidence that is the case. Like I say, it can contribute to poor air quality, but we have no evidence to link the sargassum directly to the occurrence. Like I say, we have a number of viruses circulating, and they're moving from person to person. So, I mean, this is basically what is driving the infection. If persons take measures to protect themselves from being infected, this is what will be effective at ending the situation that we're seeing.
So much. Thank you, Dr. Charles. Okay, thank you, everyone. We will now move on to the topics of discussion that were scheduled for this morning. Without further ado, I hand over to our Prime Minister, Honorable Deacon Mitchell.
Thank you, and pleasant morning to the citizens of Grenada, to the members of the media who are with us this morning. My first announcement is to indicate to the public that as of yesterday, the 3rd of April, there has been a ministerial portfolio reassignment between myself and the Honorable Dennis Cornwall, the Member of Parliament for St. Patrick East. Effective as of yesterday, the Honorable Dennis Cornwall assumed the portfolio of Minister of Finance, and I would have relinquished that portfolio. I should, however, indicate that I'm acting as Minister of Finance until the end of the week, Friday, as the Honorable Minister Cornwall is off island on government business and returns on Friday. Minister Cornwall will assume the portfolio of Minister of Finance on his return. I have relinquished the portfolio of Minister of Finance and will assume the portfolio of Minister for Public Utilities, Infrastructure, Civil Aviation, Transportation. I should point out that my ministerial portfolios for national security, information, national disaster continues. So that's the only change that there has been to the ministerial portfolios. Obviously, both Minister Cornwall and I look forward to learning our new ministries, to working with the PSs and staff at the ministries to continue to deliver on our transformation agenda and on the many projects and plans that each ministry is required to carry out. We will obviously be having transition briefs and meetings with the senior management of the respective ministries, in my case starting as of this morning, and in Minister Cornwall's case on his return to office on Friday. Obviously it's a long weekend, and so that will essentially take us into Tuesday. That's the first announcement. The second announcement is to indicate, as you would recall, as part of our measures to address the cost of living, the government had agreed from October 1, 2022 to cap the freight rates charged at the port by the Customs Department to 2019 levels. That's the pre-COVID-19 levels, in an attempt to alleviate the impact of the external cost of inflation driven by significant increases in freight rates. That initial fiscal measure was for 6 months and would have expired as of Friday, the 31st of March. The government has reviewed the report from the Ministry of Finance and from the Customs Department and have analyzed the measure that was taken. The measure was always intended to be temporary. We are satisfied that freight rates are beginning to normalize and are getting closer to pre-COVID levels of 2019. And in the circumstances, the government has taken the decision not to continue with the capping of the freight rates at 2019 levels. So effective as of the 1st of April 2023, freight would be calculated on the current market freight rates. I should indicate that as a result of the measure adopted, by the government, the government essentially forwent revenue of approximately $5 million. We want to extend our gratitude to the importers who would have passed on the reduced freight rates as a result of the government measure to our consumers. We note from the analysis coming from the Customs Department that two of the goods which were significantly impacted by the capping of the freight rates was the cost of cement and the cost of imported chicken. And obviously cement is fundamental to the construction industry, and so the construction industry in particular ought to have benefited from that. And all of us who consume imported chicken, chicken being a favorite meat product of our citizens, would also have benefited from that. We would emphasize that the other fiscal measures will continue throughout the year. These include the removal of VAT on 19 items, the payment of a $10 subsidy for consumers who consume up to 99 kilowatt hours. With GRENLEC, we want to ensure that we can keep the cost of energy, which we know is a major cost that all of us, both business and the private sector, both the government, the private sector, and individuals have to bear with. So we are ensuring that that measure remains in place. The third issue that I would ask the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance to address is the enacting of the government's commitment, which was made by us pre the election, that on assuming office, we will take steps to ensure that the salaries of public servants are paid on a bi-monthly basis. I'm indeed happy and pleased to announce that that will come into effect on the 15th of April, 2023. P.S. Sylvester will share some details with you as it relates to that. We should also point to that as a matter of policy. We will be encouraging the private sector, at least those who are not yet already paying their salaries on a bi-monthly basis, to adopt a similar approach so that we can have consistency throughout both the private and public sector when it comes to the payment of salaries. We are satisfied that such a policy approach is in fact supportive of our workers in particular, because what it allows is for you to have, in a far shorter period of time, ready access to your salaries to meet the several financial commitments that you have. We are also satisfied that there are certain advantages, for example, that can come with that by, in fact, for example, for employees who have loans, the faster you pay your loans off is the more interest you save, and it puts you in a better position, in fact, to be able to address other financial commitments. And in general, it helps with the management of one's cash flow. And cash flow is critical towards personal finances. It's critical as well towards economic activity within the island. And I just want to point out that the accomplishment of this is testimony to the hard work of the team at the Ministry of Finance. Extensive consultations were held with the workers, with the private sector, with the insurance companies, with the banks, the Chamber of Commerce, etc. And it's testimony to the fact that when we take a can-do approach, that many of the things that we think are insurmountable or cannot happen can in fact happen and happen quite easily. The issue of paying salaries bi-monthly has been something that's been bandied about and talked about in the past, perhaps for several decades, going back as far as 20, perhaps even 30 years. And our administration has demonstrated with the hard work of the team at the Ministry of Finance that this is something that we were able to achieve essentially within 9 months of taking office. So thank you to the team at the Ministry of Finance. I am going to say to all of the public servants, congratulations. You, in fact, will be paid more often. You will be in a position to meet your commitments faster. And crucially, as you're aware, we signed the collective bargaining agreement for the period 2023, 2024, and 2025 with the Grenada Union of Teachers last Wednesday. I fully expect that the police officers, the prison officers, workers represented by the Grenada Manual, Maritime and Intellectual Workers Union, as well as those represented by the Public Workers Union and TAU, would also come on board and agree to the terms and conditions that have been proposed by the government so that we can ensure that on the 15th of April, the salary increases that the teachers are now benefiting from 13% over 3 years would also be factored in to your bi-monthly payment come the 15th of April. So with that said, I will hand over to P.S. Sylvester so that he can provide some further details on the bi-monthly payment of salaries effective 15th April.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and good morning to the head table. Good morning to the members of the media and the listening and viewing public. Just to add some footnotes to the overview that the Prime Minister has provided. So effective the 15th of April, as was just mentioned, the bi-monthly or twice monthly, semi-monthly payments will commence. Given that the 15th is a holiday, persons will receive their payments by the 14th of this month. So that's the first payment will be on the 14th. The two payment dates are the 15th and the 30th of each month going forward. Where those dates fall on a holiday or fall on a weekend, then we will pay the last working day before those dates. Just to also underscore the point that was made with respect to the consultations, we've had extensive consultations with all key stakeholders, including and in particular the banks and credit unions who are main players in this, in that they are the ones who would initially receive the resources of the workers and pensioners. And we have been given the assurance that they are making preparations or have made preparations to basically facilitate the twice monthly payments. In our discussions with respect to how the banks and the credit unions will treat with those payments, they have indicated that they have been reaching out to their customers in terms of providing options on how they pay the mortgages. And as Prime Minister mentioned, there is the option to pay your mortgage on a twice monthly basis. So basically, instead of having to pay 12 payments per year, you can pay 24 payments, and of course that allows you to be able to pay down your mortgage or your loan faster. And of course there are interest benefits to that. They have also indicated that there will be flexibility for persons to be able to access their resources much faster. And so there is that option of either doing the monthly or doing the twice monthly. And so we are very happy about that with respect to persons who had fears or have concerns about how they will be able to meet their commitments. They can do so without fear. There are also issues with respect to persons being fearful that they will meet additional fees by virtue of the more regular deposit into their accounts. Again, the banks have provided information that there will be no additional fees, or there are no additional fees related to the twice monthly payments. There are a lot of concerns that came out with respect to the whole issue of money management and persons feeling that because they are receiving monies a lot faster, that they are not in a position to manage those monies. And what we will do, in fact, we are rolling out this week some money management sessions with all public workers and pensioners and others who are interested in those functions. That will start on Thursday of this week. We will have a session in the morning and one in the afternoon, and then we will continue after the holiday period in terms of the money management sessions. Together with the rollout of the twice monthly payment, we are also moving towards the issuance of electronic pay slips. Previously, government would print in excess of 5,000 plus pay slips on special paper, and of course that is a significant cost. We are moving away from that to the issuance of pay slips that will be sent directly to your personal email address. And so that again is an important development in respect of the twice monthly payments. So we've done all the testing, we've done all the technical work to support this policy, and we have also done extensive consultations, as I mentioned, with the financial institutions, with the insurance companies, with the National Insurance Scheme, with the hire purchase companies such as courts and so on. We've also met with the trade unions. We have also met with the workers on several occasions. In fact, we had a general meeting, and then we had some more focus group sessions with the police and the nurses and so on. We have made some changes to the initial policy arrangement that we were pursuing, and we have in fact incorporated quite a bit of the feedback that we got from the consultation, and I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who participated in those consultations and the, of course, useful, thoughtful and insightful comments that we received to help us to be able to move along with the government's policy in terms of this implementation. As the Prime Minister said, the objective of the policy is to provide faster access to your cash to help you to meet your commitments with greater flexibility, and as well by increasing the volume of transaction in the economy. We believe that at the macro level that there is important benefits to the twice monthly payment of salaries. Thank you. Back to you, Mr.
Well, thank you, PS. I will now ask the Honorable Minister Andy Williams, Minister for the Ministry of Mobilization, Implementation and Transformation, to provide us with an update on two issues. The first is government's drive to recruit, train and hire procurement officers to address the challenges that the government has historically faced in the implementation of its projects. And second, to provide an update on government's push to create the WASH program, which is really a nation builders program geared at addressing access to water and sanitation in all households throughout Grenada. So, Minister Williams.
Thank you, Prime Minister. So Nation Builders is designed to function as a platform that encourages a think tank, a mobilization unit, and a driving force for executing community-based and volunteer-based projects. Nation Builders unite citizens to concentrate on addressing developmental issues that are deemed low to medium hanging priorities. Now, the WASH program is part of the Nation Builders program. And WASH means water access sanitation in homes. The WASH program is an initiative to ensure that every household in the country has access to clean water and adequate sanitation facilities by 2027. This ambitious project is being executed through the efforts of the people of Grenada, with facilitation support from the Nation Builders program. And let me just give you some statistics as we get into this. In Grenada, we have approximately 1,398 households with no access to toilet facilities. We also have approximately 3,500 persons have no running water in their homes. Also, we have 8,715 persons today that uses pit latrines. And this program plans to address that. We are looking to officially launch the program in May, and we are encouraging social partners to get involved, because at the end of the day, the government cannot do everything. And we want people on the outside to come in and get involved as a community-based projects and so that at the end of the day, we can all contribute towards building Grenada. And yes, again, we know that approximately 98% of Grenadians have metered or have meters and so and access to water. But we also have 2% that are really in need. And in doing so, we want to, again, ask everyone to come in and join this project. It is a project that involves the community and is community-based. With respect to project implementation, during our budget implementation, we announced that we were going to hire some procurement officers to address bottlenecks and to speed up the implementation of projects. Thus far, we have identified 11 persons already who were selected, who were interviewed, and we are well on the way to get them employed with the government. In doing so, we can alleviate the bottlenecks, and we can now begin to speed up project implementation, because this is what we want. Last year, I spoke about the low implementation rate of the government. We have had no issues in getting projects and getting money, but we have had issue in implementing the projects. So this government is aimed at addressing this problem, and we have started, and we will be looking to move forward in a speedily manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. We are open to any questions that members of the media may have.
Online, if you can just raise your hand, and we will call on you to pose your questions to the panel. Okay, media colleagues, the floor is open to you now. GBN, you may pose your first question, please.
Yes, good morning to everyone once again on the panel. I have a question for the Minister for Implementation. Can you give me an update on the River Road project and the St. George's Vendors Market?
The River Road project, we have tendered 3 of the last components, and we have received bids and so. So as we speak now, we are evaluating the contractors to really complete the project. The project is well underway. You know, we have seen some flooding last year, but it was because the project was not completed as yet. We had one issue that we are rectifying now, which is the issue by the cemetery, and in doing so, we will complete the project in time and hopefully for the next rain season. What was the other question?
Just one.
Right, the market.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right. The market issue is an issue that we have to tackle, because we are hearing from citizens every day, number one, that you cannot walk on the streets, vendors are on the sidewalks. So it's something that we'll have to tackle soon. So you will see my ministry together with the Ministry of Infrastructure and so playing a very important part in really striving this, because we have to get to a place where our tongue, is more attractive and is more, it's being utilized for what it's supposed to be used for, basically. So we will be working on it, and you will see some action soon.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. GBN, do you have another question?
Yes, my other question would go towards our Prime Minister, Dickon Mitchell. Can you give me a reasoning for the change in portfolio? And based on the feedback received on the data protection bill, is there any plans for government to amend, or are they going to continue with that bill?
All right, I'll take the second question first. We have been engaging in consultations with several stakeholders in relation to the data protection bill. Once we are complete with the consultations, we will then make a determination as to whether there's a need for any amendments or whether we proceed. The Senate is sitting, I believe, on the 6th, 2 days from today, to debate the bill and show there is an opportunity there as well for any further clarifications or concerns that may come from the various senators who represent various sectoral interests in Grenada to look at any potential amendments that may exist. I want to make a point, though, of saying that to a large extent, I think what is clear coming out of the consultations is that there's, in a sense, a fundamental misunderstanding more than anything else as to, first of all, what is data? That's one. Second, what is personal data in a commercial transaction? And so we do recognize that there's a need for us as we move more and more into a digital age, which necessarily means significant amounts of data is going to be collected, whether it's by the government or by private individuals or commercial entities when they interact with you. That people understand what data is, understand the context in which they're giving data about themselves or with their spending habits or with their behavioral patterns, to ensure that that information is not abused. And that is primarily the purpose of the data protection bill. It is to protect information about persons in their private personal capacities which they hand over when engaging in commercial transactions. So I think what is clear coming out of the engagements is that there's a need for general education on digital literacy, on data literacy, and for persons to understand how the information they provide about themselves in a digital world, in a virtual world, how and why it needs to be protected to ensure that, in fact, you are safeguarded from persons who may want to misuse that data, both from a commercial point of view, as well as from perhaps a personal point of view. Right, and the second question, as we review our performance, we are 9 months in government. I think I should start by indicating that all ministers, and I think senior management, would in fact be subject to review, and we collectively would be subject to asking ourselves, how can we better improve and manage the performance of the government? And part of that also involves giving ministers the opportunity to experience, handle, and manage different portfolios. As you are well aware, no minister currently sitting in the government has ever been a minister before. And we think it is absolutely crucial from as early as possible to give our ministers, including myself, including Minister Cornwall, and others, the opportunity, if the need arises and if there's an opportunity to do so, to be able to be cross-trained and to cross-learn the various ministries that we function in. As you're aware, Minister Cornwall is in fact a former public servant and a former member of the Ministry of Finance. So he certainly has the experience and the expertise to competently manage, together with the senior members of the Ministry of Finance, As you're also aware, I have never worked in the public service, and prior to getting involved in politics, I have never worked for the government, save for the 2 years that I taught at Presentation Brothers College. So as Prime Minister, it's also important for me to be able to get the opportunity to cross-learn and cross-train across different ministries. And in the case of the Ministry of Public Utilities, it is a vast ministry with several statutory bodies delivering on a number of services, from energy to water to postal services to roads to government maintenance, etc. And so as part of that learning process, that is important for me as well. I thought it would be important to give myself an opportunity as well to be able to learn and to manage some of other ministries, and the Ministry of Public Utilities would have been one that I selected for that purpose.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. We will now take questions from Linda Straker. Linda, the floor is yours.
Good morning again. I am following up with the last answer the Prime Minister gave with regard to recently high New Year assignment of the Ministry of Finance to Mr. Cornwall. Based on what he just said there, am I to conclude that within the next couple months there will be a major reshuffle of ministers so they can each gain some more experience?
Well, no, you're not to conclude that. If or when that happens, then obviously we will inform the public.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Linda, do you have another question?
Yes, I have a lot more questions. My other question is the Prime Minister reassignment of the portfolio. Can you tell us now how much persons will be serving as permanent secretary in his ministry? And will Mr. Sylvester continue to serve as the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance?
Yes, Minister P.S. Sylvester continues to serve as the PS. I am not sure I follow the second question. I have different ministerial portfolios, so there is a permanent secretary in the Prime Minister's office, and the Prime Minister's office is essentially the Home Office, which currently handles, as I indicated, national security, disaster management, information, and the permanent secretary in that ministry is Ms. Carleen McQuilkin. She's recently been appointed as at the beginning of February. And in the Ministry of Infrastructure and Physical Development, Public Utilities, Civil Aviation and Transportation, there are currently 2 permanent secretaries there. Ms. Sylvia Bennett-Thomas, who's been recently appointed to act, and Ms. Rhonda Jones, who is the PS there with responsibility for transportation. So the number of permanent secretaries in the respective ministries remain the same.
Okay, thank you, Prime Minister. And Linda, I note that you have several questions that you would like to ask, but we will move through the first round and then we will come back around to you, if that's okay. So now we're going to call on Ms. Nancy McGuire. Nancy, the floor is yours.
Good morning again to everybody. I would like to speak to the situation with water and what you were saying about running water and how many homes, and what is the involvement with NWASA in this? And in that regard, let me just ask, how quickly does NWASA respond to reports of leaky pipes and broken mains and that sort of thing? Because we're in the dry season and I'm seeing water being wasted in different places. Thank you very much.
All right, well, as the new Minister for Public Infrastructure and Public Water Utilities, I will answer Nancy the second question by saying I hope NWASA responds promptly. And to that extent that we don't have any NWASA representative here. But if there is a concern and if the public has a concern, I'm sure NWASA has a hotline for reporting damaged or leaking water mains. But water obviously is precious, particularly in the dry season. And as I said, I would hope that they respond promptly. If they don't, then obviously it's something that we would take up with them to ensure that they address. The second part as to how is NWASA involved in the potential WASH program, well, the key thing is we view, and I'm saying this from a policy perspective, that access to water as a fundamental right. In fact, from where we sit, access to water is more important than access to electricity. Without without water, you literally cannot live. And so at a minimum, we want to ensure that every household in Grenada has the opportunity for access to water. And so we will be reviewing, in fact, the NWASA Act as part of the WASH initiative. And so from a policy perspective, if there is a need for any legislative changes to ensure that the current law does not stand as an impediment to ensuring that persons have access to water, we will do so. And so as recently as yesterday, I discussed with the Attorney General the need to review the NWASA Act, because we do appreciate that currently, if you apply to NWASA for water, for example, there is a legal requirement to prove that you own the property. Now, title ownership and land ownership in Grenada is problematic in many instances, and oftentimes, particularly persons who are disadvantaged, live on properties that they may not have title to, but their families may simply have lived on it for a significantly long period of time, in some cases generations. And that cannot and should not be an impediment to you having access to water for basic sanitation, to be able to cook, to be able to bathe, and to be able to have a toilet. So from a policy perspective, that's our approach. We will look at the existing legislation, and if we need to make any amendments or tweakings or any exceptions, specifically to ensuring that we meet the targets that we've set for 2027, we will do so.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you, Ms. Maguire. Nisha Paul, we will now take your questions. Nisha, the floor is open. Good morning.
Hi, good morning to everyone. My first question is for the Honorable Prime Minister, as it relates to the vision for the ministry that you are now taking over in terms of transportation, public transportation. The Bus Association has been calling for policy direction to address issues such as pirating, and also the former government had embarked on a study in terms of finding ways to improve the delivery of public transportation. What is your government's position in this regard?
All right, so let me start by saying I've not seen the results of the study as yet, and so I'm not in a position to, in fact, react to the question. But I can assure you, once the results of this survey or study are in and we've reviewed it, we will certainly be engaging with the Bus Owners Association and the other operators of buses in Grenada. Grenada is in a unique situation where we call it public transportation, but it's all privately owned. And that obviously creates a challenge, because if it's all privately owned, it basically means that it is and will be driven by the need to cover your costs and to make a profit on it. And so to a large extent, it's normal, natural for bus drivers and so on to want to ply the profitable routes, because at the end of the day, they have the banks to repay, they have the families to take care of, and they need to also maintain their vehicles. So the challenge we face is transportation is fundamental to economic development. And therefore, we have to engage in wide consultations with the Bus Owners Association, with the busmen, and with the citizens of the country as to how we develop a complete transportation, public transportation system that allows us to, in fact, grow the economy, that allows for more economic activities, that allows for cheaper transportation costs. It is very expensive to use the public transportation that is privately owned in Grenada. It poses significant challenges even for school children to get to school in many instances. And as a result, there has been dramatic increases in the number of vehicles that persons have bought privately so that they can get around. That is also posing significant challenges for a small island like Grenada. Our roadways, frankly, were not conceptualized, and they've not been built to accommodate the 70 or so, between 60 to 70,000 vehicles that we have on the road. And I'm sure if this continues unabated, we will probably have 100, 150,000 vehicles in no time, and we will still end up in traffic gridlock. So it is something that will require extensive consultations. So it's one of the issues that I appreciate as I go into the Ministry of Public Utilities, Physical Development and Transportation, that we will have to tackle. But again, it has to be tackled in conjunction with the citizens of the country. We have to ask ourselves some fundamental questions, like whether solving the transportation situation can happen by mainly just continuing to import vehicles, whether or not the public would have the appetite for the government, for example, assisting private bus owners in some form of concessions or subsidies so that the price of transportation can be reduced. So those are some of the conversations. We are not using, as it stands currently, vehicles that are electric or solar powered, or that are using new age, efficient, low carbon energy type fuels. Those are issues we have to address. The government itself, most of its vehicles still burn gas and diesel and so on. So there are a lot of issues we have to look at. If we are going to grow things like the tourism sector and so on, having reliable transportation at night is critical. Because if we're going to have entertainment, if we're going to have activities and so on, people need to be able to get to and fro at an affordable cost. So it's a major challenge, but it's one that we are keen to tackle and take on. And I expect in the not too distant future, we will begin the engagement with stakeholders, starting with the Bus Owners Association.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. Nisha, do you have a second question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. My second question is also for the Honorable Prime Minister. The CBI program. I noticed a release that stated it's earned over 171 million in the first 2 months. Can you comment on the performance of the program under your watch? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nisha.
Sorry, Nisha, I was just trying to verify the publication that you referred to. I'm not aware that the CBI unit nor the Ministry of Finance, which will are the two official sources for financial information from CBI, published any such report. So I'm not actually in a position to respond. I could ask the Permanent Secretary. I do not have current figures with me as to the performance of the CBI unit as at the first quarter. If the PS has that readily available, I will ask him to deliver that.
Thank you, Prime Minister. So, so that information, I'm not sure where that came from. We have published the reports, that's the fiscal summary for January and February, so it's on Government of Grenada website, Ministry of Finance website, sorry, so www.finance.gd. If you review those reports, what you will see there for both January and February, that we have collected around $172 million for the first 2 months of the year. In terms of the IRD, that's the Inland Revenue Department, and Customs, they are in fact both ahead of the targets for the year so far, as well as the CBI program. So in terms of the CBI revenues, the collections for the first 2 months is around $33 million, which is slightly ahead of the targets for those 2 months. We will shortly release the figures for March 2023.
Okay, thank you, PS. We now move on to Nisha Peters. Nisha, the floor is yours. Can you pose your 2 questions?
Hello once again. My first question is for Minister Williams. So Williams, we're seeing buildings like little booths, the palace going up along the river road around the new wall that is built there. And look at it. I want to know what is so different from these booths going up there to those that was along, along Kirani Boulevard. I know physical planning has the issue with it. Those in River Road, physical plan has the issue with it because they were told not to put the garage there, and as we can see, it's evident that it's going back there. Are we going to see any changes being made to that, or is that something going to be permanent, be placed there for people to continue doing business along that area?
Thank you.
I have a second question after you answer.
So let me just say that if you drive around Grenada, I think we have inherited a situation where you have people putting up booths all over the place. And yes, we want to encourage people making a living. We want to encourage the poor man, not just begging, but actually going out and doing something to earn his dollar. But at the end of the day, we must do it in a structured manner. And that is what we are trying to address. So the Kirani Boulevard, first of all, you hear our citizens speaking about it, and it's been an eyesore. And this, and Kirani is, you can see, one of the world's greatest 400-meter runner. And I think that if we are giving him something, it has to look good, it has to look presentable, and pleasing to the eyes also. So the fact that we cleaned it up was to bring it back as to what it was supposed to really be. And we are looking to beautify it. What we will be doing is to evaluating different places as we go along. There's a port highway which we have to address. There's the market situation again which we have to address, right? And so we will be looking to address these things as we go along. I cannot tell you exactly what next, but we are going to tackle it as we move. And yes, I've seen exactly what you have spoken about, and we will assess it. And again, we have to do it with consultation with the people, because we are a government for the people. And and whatever we do, it has to be for the betterment. And let me just use this opportunity to say this, that the guys who were at the K1 James Boulevard, most of them are now in a better position than before. Right? We got jobs for them. We got places to stay for them. We got even, I want to say much, but we got stuff for them so that to ensure that they are more comfortable now than they were. So, and in moving people, we have to be careful because we have to sort of not try to put them in a worse off position. Not that we're trying to reward them, but at the end of the day, we are dealing with people. And we have to be very careful when we are doing that. So we will look at the situation in River Road, and we will address it. And hopefully, with the new Minister of Infrastructure, we will find a perfect plan to deal with it. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. Nisha, you may pose your second question.
My second question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Michelle, I want to know what innovative mechanisms are being used to secure or explore sustainable financing for the country?
All right. Thank you for the question. Well, I think, let me say this. When we say financing for the country, there's financing for the government, which is one, and then obviously there is the need to encourage private sector growth and development. That private sector growth and development, to a large extent, is private, and the government's role there could merely be to ensure that, from a fiscal incentives perspective, for example, we can direct our fiscal policy towards the areas that we want to grow. And I'll give an example. We've talked about the creative economy, and the creative economy becoming an engine for economic activity and for economic growth and for development. And so we can take something as simple as paintings. Many Grenadians paint. They're fantastic painters, but they do it as a hobby. They don't necessarily do it to monetize and to make a living or an income from that. We want to change that. We want persons to not just paint for the sake of painting, but paint and be able to earn a living from it. And therefore, what we've done is to create, for example, a desk called the Creative Economy. We've passed legislation that allows persons to import into Grenada without paying duties on materials, inputs, tools that you would use in the creative economy, so that it allows you to develop products, develop goods, develop your intellectual capacity without having to, in fact, pay duties and so on to the government. So that puts you in a position to, in fact, have more products, more goods that you can then sell and earn an income from. And that is all private sector. But all the government would have done was to put in place the policy and the infrastructure measures to assist that in happening. From a government perspective, the government gets its revenues basically from taxation or from borrowing. And so from a taxation point of view, you may be aware that come 2024, we intend to embark upon a new tax system driven largely from a digital basis. The advantages of doing so is that, one, it actually reduces the cost of tax collection to the government. So you can pay your taxes online at any time. 3 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, 6 in the morning, it is completely up to you. You don't have to leave and come down to the Treasury and stand in line and engage in the necessary paperwork that comes from filing your taxes. That makes it much easier for you to pay your taxes, and it makes it much easier for the government to collect the taxes. And therefore, we expect, just from that measure alone, that there will be significant improvement in the tax collection measures that allows government then to be more efficient and to meet and exceed its tax collection revenues. But from a borrowing perspective, we continue to ensure that our borrowing is prudent, and we continue to ensure that the borrowing rates at which we borrow are very concessionary and very low. And to that extent, you are able to borrow more if you meet your own commitments to your creditors and you pay them on time, and you pay them in keeping with the arrangements that have been agreed upon. And to that extent, managing the economy, managing the government's revenues are critical, and we continue to do so to ensure that we meet all of our obligations to our creditors, so that it puts us in a greater stead. And to that extent, you would recall earlier, upon assuming office, one of the things we were able to do is to negotiate with the Libyan government to ensure that we had a formal arrangement in place to repay monies that were viewed as loans to Grenada, to ensure that we begun addressing the fact that Grenada was, from a credit rating point of view, that Grenada had a selective default rating. The other main creditor that we need to address is the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, our sister CARICOM neighbor to the south, arising from monies that were advanced to Grenada in the aftermath of Hurricane Ivan and thereafter. And we are working on addressing that. And we believe once those two are addressed, then it means Grenada's credit rating will no longer be selective default, and that enhances Grenada's ability to access even more concessionary financing. But outside of that, I think we are also keen to explore things like carbon trading. We are also keen to explore how we address climate change as a concept to leverage for more concessionary financing, given the challenges that we face from climate change. So the Ministry of Environment and Climate Resilience is also key to that. We are seeking to have Grenada and the Ministry accredited to a number of the climate-related funds to see whether we can also access concessionary financing from that. Pierre Sylvester, I don't know if you want to chime in with anything additional.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Just to add that, I mean, our traditional creditors, so the CARICOM Development Bank, World Bank, IMF, even the central bank, I mean, they have available sources of concessional financing that we can leverage from time to time, and we are, in fact, working towards mobilizing those resources.
Yeah. I perhaps should just add, additionally, we also looking at and have initiated becoming members of additional lending and financing institutions. So Cabinet, for instance, on Monday, approved Grenada joining the partnership agreement between the OECS CARICOM and the Afrexim Bank. The Afrexim is the shorthand for the African Export-Import Bank, which is a subsidiary of the African Development Bank. Last year, CARICOM and the OECS signed a partnership agreement with Afrexim Bank. The bank is a well-run, successful bank that has been in existence for 30 years on the continent of Africa. And part of this is to look at how we can leverage non-traditional lending institutions, particularly to assist private sector entities within the OECS and in Grenada to get additional concessionary financing. We are also looking at exploring the possibility of becoming a member of the Caribbean and Latin American Development Bank, which is in short known as CAF. The team at the Ministry of Finance is currently reviewing that situation with the hope that we can get cabinet approval in the not too distant future to also be able to partner with that institution. The aim again is to give us as much flexibility as possible when it comes to concessionary financing to drive Grenada's economic growth.
Thank you, Prime Minister and P.S. Sylvester, for the comprehensive response. Colleagues, we will now open a second round of questioning. Ms. Straker, I noticed that your hand is not raised, but you did mention that you are keen to pose additional questions to the panel. So I will give you an opportunity to do so now if you are still on the call. Ms. Straker?
Yes, I am still on the call.
Okay.
Yes, my question is, will Grenada be attending the spring meeting of the World Bank? And if we are, who is leading the delegation, and how big will be that that delegation? That question is for the PS Mike. He said that with the bi-monthly salary payment, people will be able to pay off the loans faster and so forth. From my observation, it's only a matter of they having the same expenditure, but what is different, they are getting the same amount of